Poor Girl by Elizabeth Taylor and read by Christopher Halton. Miss Chasty's first pupil was a flirtatious little boy. At 7 years he was alarmingly precocious, and sometimes she thought that he despised his childhood, regarding it as a waiting time which he used only as a rehearsal for adult life. He was already more sophisticated than his young governess, and disturbed her with his air of dalliance, the mockery with which he set about his lessons, the preposterous conversations he led her into, guiding her skillfully away from work, confusing her with bizarre conjectures and irreverent ideas, so that she would clasp her hands tightly under the plush tablecloth and pray that his father would not choose such a moment to observe her teaching, coming in abruptly as he sometimes did, and signalling to her to continue her lesson. At those times his son's eyes were especially lively, fixed cruelly upon his governess as he listened, smiling faintly to her faltering voice, measuring her timidly. He would answer her questions correctly, but significantly, as if he knew that by his aptitude he rescued her from dismissal. There were many governesses waiting for employment, he implied, and this was so at the beginning of the century. He understood her good fortune at having a pupil who could so easily learn, could display the results of her teaching to such advantage for the benefit of the rather sombre, pompous figure seated at the window. When his father, apparently satisfied, had left them without a word, the boy's manner changed. He seemed fatigued and too absent-minded to reply to any more questions. "Hilary," she would say sharply, "are you attending to me?" Her sharpness and her foolishness amused him, coming as he knew they did from the tension of the last 10 minutes. "Why, my dear girl, of course. You must address me by my name." "Certainly, dear Florence. Miss Chasty." His lips might shape the words, which was too weary to say. Sometimes, when she was correcting his sums, he would come round the table to stand beside her, leaning against her heavily, looking closely at her face, not at his book, breathing steadily down his nose so that tendrils of hair wavered on her neck and against her cheeks. His stillness, his concentration on her, and his too heavy leaning worried her. She felt something experimental in his attitude, as if he were not leaning against her at all, but against someone in the future. He is only a baby, she reminded herself, but she would try to shift from him, feeling a vague distaste. She would blush as if he were a grown man, and her heart could be heard beating quickly. He was aware of this and would take up the corrected book and move back to his place. Once he proposed to her, and she had the feeling that it was a proposal rehearsal, and that he was making use of her, as an actor might ask her to hear his lines. "You must go on with your work," she said. "I can shade in a map and talk as well." "Then talk sensibly. You think I am too young, I dare say, but you could wait for me to grow up. I can do that quickly enough." "You are far from grown up at the moment. You only say these things because you think that governesses ought to. I suppose you don't know how governesses go on, because you have never been one until now, and you were too poor to have one of your own when you were young." "That is impertinent, Hilary. You once told me that your father couldn't afford one, which is a different way of putting it. I shouldn't have thought they cost much." He had a way of just making a remark, of breathing it so gently that it was scarcely said, and might conveniently be ignored. He was a dandified little boy. His smooth hair was like a silk cap, combed straight from the crown to a level line above his topaz eyes. His sailor suits were spotless. The usual boldness changed to an agonized fussiness if his serge sleeve brushed against chalk, or if he should slip on the grassy terrace and stain his clothes with green. On their afternoon walks he took to climb a tree or jump across puddles. At first she thought him intimidated by his mother or nurse, but soon she realized that his mother entirely indulged him, and the nurse had her thoughts all bent upon the new baby. His fussiness was just another part of his grown-upness come too soon. The house was comfortable, although to Florence rather too sealed up and overheated after her own damp and draughty home. Her work was not hard, and her loneliness only what she had expected. Cut off from the kitchen by her education, she lacked the feuds and camaraderie, gossip and cups of tea, which made life more interesting for the domestic staff. None of the maids, coming to light the lamp at dusk or laying the schoolroom table for tea, ever presumed beyond a remark or two about the weather. One late afternoon, she and Hilary returned from their walk and found the lamps already lit. Florence went to her room to tidy herself before tea. When she came down to the schoolroom, Hilary was already there, sitting on the window seat and staring out over the park as his father did. The room was bright and warm, and a maid had put a white cloth over the plush one and was beginning to lay the table. The air was full of a heavy scent, dry and musky. To Florence it smelt quite unlike the eau de cologne she sometimes sprinkled on a handkerchief when she had a headache, and she disapproved so much that she returned the maid's greeting coldly and bade Hilary open the window. "Open the window, dear girl," he said. "We shall catch our very deaths. You will do as I ask, and remember in future how to address me." She was angry with the maid, who now seemed to her an immoral creature, and angry to be humiliated before her. "But why?" asked Hilary. "I don't approve of my schoolroom being turned into a scented bower." She kept her back to the room and was trembling, for she had never rebuked a servant before. "I approve of it," Hilary said, sniffing loudly. "I think it's lovely," the maid said. "I noticed it as soon as I opened the door." "Is this some joke, Hilary?" Florence asked when the maid had gone. "No, what?" "This smell in the room." "No, you smell of it most anyhow." He put his nose to her sleeve and breathed deeply. It seemed to Florence that this was so, that her clothes had caught the perfume among their folds. She lifted her palms to her face, then went to the window and leant out into the air as far as she could. "Shall I pour out the tea, dear girl?" "Yes, please." She took her place at the table abstractedly, and as she drank her tea she stared about the room, frowning. When Hilary's mother looked in, as she often did at this time, Florence stood up in a startled way. "Good evening, Mrs. Wilson. Hilary, put a chair for your mamma." "Don't let me disturb you." Mrs. Wilson sank into the rocking chair by the fire and gently tipped to and fro. "Have you finished our tea, darling boy?" she asked. "Are you going to read me a story from your book? Oh, there is Lady scratching at the door. Let her in for mamma." Hilary opened the door and a balding old pug dog with bloodshot eyes waddled in. "Come, lady beautiful one, come to mistress. What is wrong with her, poor pet lamb?" The bitch had stopped just inside the room and lifted her head and howled. "What had frightened her then? Come, beauty, coax her with a sponge cake, Hilary." She reached forward to the table to take the dish, and doing so noticed Florence's empty teacup. On the rim was a crimson smear like the imprint of a lip. She gave a sponge finger to Hilary, who tried to quieten the pug. Then she leaned back in her chair and studied Florence again, as she had studied her when she had engaged her a few weeks earlier. The girl's looks were appropriate enough, appropriate to a clergyman's daughter and a governess. Her square chin looked resolute, her green eyes innocent, her dress was modest and unbecoming. Yet Mrs. Wilson could detect an excitability, even feverishness, which she had not noticed before, and she wondered if she had mistaken guardedness for innocence and deceit for modesty. She was reaching this conclusion, rocking back and forth when she saw Florence's hand stretch out and turn the cup round in its saucer so that the red stain was out of sight. "What is wrong with Lady?" Hilary asked, for the dog would not be pacified with sponge fingers, but kept making barking advances further into the room, then growling in retreat. "Perhaps she is crying at the new moon," said Florence, and she went to the window and drew back the curtain. As she moved, her skirts rustled. "If she has silk underwear as well," Mrs. Wilson thought. She had clearly heard the sound of taffetas, and she imagined the drab, shiny alpaca dress concealing frivolity and wantonness. "Open the door, Hilary," she said. "I will take Lady away. Vernon shall give her a run in the park. I think a quiet read for Hilary, and then an early bedtime, Miss Chasty. He looks pale this evening." "Yes, Mrs. Wilson." Florence stood respectfully by the table, hiding the cup. The hypocrisy! Mrs. Wilson thought, and she trembled as she crossed the landing and went downstairs. She hesitated to tell her husband of her uneasiness, knowing his susceptibilities to women whom his conscience taught him to deplore. Hidden below the apparent urbanity of their married life were old unhappinesses, little acts of treachery and disloyalty which pained her to remember, bruises upon her peace of mind and her pride, letters found, a pretty maid dismissed, an actress who had blackmailed him. As he read the lesson in church, looking so perfectly upright and honourable a man, she sometimes thought of his escapades, but not with bitterness or cynicism, only with pain at her memories and a whisper of fear about the future. For some time she had been spared those whispers, and had hoped that at least that their marriage had at last achieved its calm. To speak of Florence as she must might both arouse his curiosity and revive the past. Nevertheless, she had her duty to her son to fulfil and her own anger to appease, and she opened the library door very determinedly. "Oliver, I am sorry to interrupt your work, but I must speak to you." He put down the Strand magazine quite happily, aware that she was not a sarcastic woman. Oliver and her son were extraordinarily alike. "As soon as Hilary has grown a moustache, we shall not know them apart," Mrs. Wilson often said, and her husband liked this little joke which made him feel more youthful. He did not know that she added a silent prayer. "Oh God, please do not let him be like him, though." "You seem troubled, Louise." His voice was rich and authoritative. He enjoyed setting to rights her little domestic flurries, and waited indulgently to hear of some tradesman's misdemeanour or servant's laziness. "Yes, I am troubled about Miss Chasty." Little Miss Mouse! I was rather troubled myself. I noticed 2 spelling faults in Hilary's botany essay, which she claimed to have corrected. I said nothing before the boy, but I shall acquaint her with it when the opportunity arises. "Do you often go to the schoolroom then?" "From time to time. I like to be sure that our choice was wise." "It was not. It was misguided and unwise. All young people seem slipshod nowadays." "She is more than slipshod. I believe she should go. I think she is quite brazen." "Oh yes, I should have laughed at that myself if it had been said to me an hour ago, but I have just come from the schoolroom, and it occurs to me that now she has settled down and feels more secure, since you pass over her mistakes, she is beginning to take advantage of your leniency, and to show herself in her true colours. I felt a sinister atmosphere up there, and I am quite upset and exhausted by it. I went up to hear Hilary's reading. They were finishing tea, and the room was full of the most overpowering scent, her scent. It was disgusting." "Unpleasant?" "No, not at all, but upsetting." "Disturbing?" She would not look at him or reply, hearing no more indulgence or condescension in his voice, but the quality of warming interest. "And then I saw her teacup, and there was a mark on it, a red smear where her lips had touched it. She did not know I saw it, and as soon as she noticed it herself, she turned it round away from me. She is an immoral woman, and has come into our house to teach our son. I have never noticed a trace of artificiality in her looks. It seemed to me that she was rather colourless. She has been sly. This evening she looked quite different, quite flushed and excitable. I know that she had rouged her lips or painted them, or whatever those women do." Her eyes filled with tears. "I shall observe her for a day or 2, Oliver said, trying to keep anticipation from his voice. "I should like her to go at once." "Never act rashly. She is entitled to a quarter's notice unless there is definite blame. We could make ourselves very foolish if you have been mistaken. Oh, I know that you are sure, but it has been known for you to misjudge others. I shall take stock of her and decide if she is suitable. She is still Miss Mouse to me, and I cannot think otherwise until I see the evidence with my own eyes." "There was something else as well," Mrs. Wilson said wretchedly. "And what was that?" "I should rather not say." She had changed her mind about further accusations. Silk underwear would prove, she guessed, too inflammatory. "I shall go up ostensibly to mention Hilary's spelling faults." He could not go fast enough and stood up at once. "But Hilary will be in bed." "I could not mention the spelling faults if he were not." Shall I come with you? My dear Louise, why should you? It would look very strange, a deputation about 2 spelling faults. Then don't be long, will you? I hope you won't be long. He went to the schoolroom, but there was no one there. Hilary's storybook lay closed upon the table, and Miss Chasty's sewing was folded neatly. As he was standing there looking about him and sniffing hard, a maid came in with a tray of crockery. "Has Master Hilary gone to bed?" he asked, feeling rather foolish and confused. The only scent in the air was a distinct smell, even a haze of cigarette smoke. "Yes, sir." "And Miss Chasty, where is she?" "She went to bed too, sir." "Is she unwell?" "She spoke of a chronic head, sir." The maid stacked the cups and saucers in the cupboard and went out. Nothing was wrong with the room apart from the smell of smoke, and Mr. Wilson went downstairs. His wife was waiting in the hall. She looked up expectantly, in some relief at seeing him so soon. "Nothing," he said dramatically. "She has gone to bed with a headache. No wonder she looked feverish." "You noticed the scent?" "There was none," he said. "No trace, nothing. Just imagination, dear Louise. I thought that it must be so." He went to the library and took up his magazine again, but he was too disturbed to read, and thought with impatience of the following day. Florence could not sleep. She had gone to her room, not with a headache, but to escape conversations until she had faced her predicament alone. This she was doing, lying on the honeycomb quilt which, since maids do not wait on governesses, had not been turned down. The schoolroom this evening seemed to have been wreathed about with a strange miasma, the innocent nature of the place polluted in a way which she could not understand or have explained. Something new, it seemed, had entered the room which had not belonged to her or become a part of her. The scent had clung about her clothes, the stained cup was her cup, and her handkerchief with which she had rubbed it clean was still reddened. And finally, as she had stared in the mirror, trying to re-establish her personality, the affected little laugh which startled her had come from herself. It had driven her from the room. "I cannot explain the inexplicable," she thought wearily, and began to prepare herself for bed. Homesickness hit her like a blow on the head. "Whatever they do to me, I have always my home," she promised herself. But she could not think who they might be, for no one in this house had threatened her. Mrs. Wilson had done no more than irritate her with her commonplace fussing over Hilary and her dog, and Florence was prepared to overcome much more than irritations. Mr. Wilson's pomposity, his constant watch on her work, intimidated her, but she knew that all who must earn their living must have fears lest their work should not seem worth the payment. Hilary was easy to manage. She had quickly seen that she could always deflect him from rebelliousness by opening a new subject for conversation. Any idea would be a counter-attraction to naughtiness. He wanted her to sharpen his wits upon. And is that all that teaching is, or should be? She had wondered. The servants had been good to her, realizing that she would demand nothing of them. She had suffered great loneliness, but had foreseen it as part of her position. Now she felt fear nudging it away. "I am not lonely any more," she thought. "I am not alone any more, and I have lost something." She said her prayers. Then, sitting up in bed, kept the candle alight while she brushed her hair and read the Bible. "Perhaps I have lost my reason," she suddenly thought, resting her fingers on her place in the Psalms. She lifted her head and saw her shadow stretch up the powdery rose-sprinkled wall. "Now can I keep that secret?" she wondered, "when there is no one to help me to do it? Only those who are watching to see it happen." She was not afraid in her bedroom as she had been in the schoolroom, but her perplexed mind found no replies to its questions. She blew out the candle and tried to fall asleep, but lay and cried for a long time, and yearned to be at home again, and comforted in her mother's arms. In the morning she met kind inquiries. Nurse was so full of solicitude that Florence felt guilty. "I came up with a warm drink and put my head round the door, but you were in the land of Nod, so I drank it myself. I should take a grey powder, or I could mix you a gargle. There are a lot of throats about." "I am quite better this morning," said Florence, and she felt calmer as she sat down at the schoolroom table with Hilary. Yet it was all true, her reason whispered. The morning hasn't altered that. You have been crying, said Hilary. Your eyes are red. Sometimes people's eyes are red from other causes, headaches and colds. She smiled brightly. And sometimes from crying, as I said. I should think usually from crying. Page 51, she said, locking her hands together in her lap. Very well. He opened the book, pressed down the pages, and lowered his nose to them, breathing the smell of print. He is utterly sensuous, she thought. He extracts every pleasure, every sensation, down to the most trivial. They seemed imprisoned in the schoolroom by the silence of the rest of the house and by the rain outside. Her calm began to break up into frustration, and she put her hands behind her chair and pressed them against the hot mesh of the fireguard to steady herself. As she did so, she felt a curious derangement of both mind and body, of desire unsettling her once sluggish, peaceful nature, desire horribly defined, though without direction. I have soon finished those, said Hilary, bringing his sums and placing them before her. She glanced at her palms, which were criss-crossed deep with crimson, where she had pressed them against the fireguard. Then she took up her pen and dipped it into the red ink. Don't lean against me, Hilary, she said. I love the scent so much. It had returned, musky enveloping, varying as she moved. She ticked the sums quickly, thinking that she would set Hilary more work and escape for a moment to calm herself, change her clothes or cleanse herself in the rain. Hearing Mr. Wilson's footsteps along the passage, she knew that her escape was cut off, and raised wild-looking eyes as he came in. He mistook panic for passion, thought that by opening the door suddenly he had caught her out and laid bare her secret, her pathetic adoration. Good morning, he said musically, and made his way to the window seat. Don't let me disturb you. He said this without irony, although the thought, so it is that way the wind blows. Poor creature. He had never found it difficult to imagine that women were in love with him. I will hear your verbs, Florence told Hilary, and opened the French grammar as if she did not know them herself. Her eyes, from so much crying, were a pale and brilliant green, and as the scent drifted in Oliver's direction and he turned to her, she looked fully at him. Ah, the still waters, he thought, and stood up suddenly. Ils vont, he corrected Hilary, and touched his shoulder as he paused. Are you attending to Miss Chasty? Is she attending to me? Hilary murmured. The risk was worth taking, for neither heard. His father appeared to be sleepwalking, and Florence deliberately closed her eyes, as if looking down were not enough to blur the outlines of her desire. I find it difficult, Oliver said to his wife, to reconcile your remarks about Miss Chasty with the young woman herself. I have just come from the schoolroom, and she was engaged in nothing more immoral than teaching French verbs. That not very well, incidentally. But can you explain what I have told you? I can't do that, he said gaily. For who can explain a jealous woman's fancies, he implied. He began to spend more time in the schoolroom from surveillance, he said. Miss Chasty, though not outwardly of an amorous nature, was still not what he had at first supposed. A suppressed wantonness hovered beneath her primness. She was the ideal governess in his eyes, irreproachable, yet not unapproachable. As she was so conveniently installed, he could take his time in divining the extent of her willingness, especially as he was growing older, and the game was beginning to be worth more than the triumph of winning it. To his wife he upheld Florence, saw nothing wrong save in her scholarship, which needed to be looked into, the explanation for his more frequent visits to the schoolroom. He laughed teasingly at Louise's fancies. The schoolroom indeed became a focal point of the house, the stronghold of Mr. Wilson's desire and his wife's jealousy. We are never alone, said Hilary. Either Papa or Mamma is here. Perhaps they wonder if you are good enough for me. Hilary! His father had heard the last sentence as he opened the door, and the first, as he hovered outside, listening. I doubt if my ears deceived me. You will go to your room while you think of a suitable apology, and I think of an ample punishment. Shall I take my history book with me, or shall I just waste time? I have indicated how to spend your time." "That won't take long enough," said Hilary beneath his breath as he closed the door. "Meanwhile, I apologize for him," said his father. He did not go to his customary place by the window, but came to the hearthrug where Florence stood behind her chair. "We have indulged him too much, and he has been too much with adults. Have there been other occasions?" "No, indeed, sir." "You find him tractable?" "Oh, yes." "And are you happy in your position?" "Yes." As the now so familiar scent began to wreathe about the room, she stepped back from him and began to speak rapidly, as urgently as if she were dying and must make some explanation while she could. "Perhaps after all Hilary's right, and you do wonder about my competence, and if I can give him all he should have. Perhaps a man would teach him more." She began to feel a curious infraction of the room and of her personality, seemed to lose the true Florence, and the room lightened as if the season had been changed. "You are mistaken," he was saying. "Have I ever given you any hint that we were not satisfied?" Her timidity had quite dissolved, and he was shocked by the sudden boldness of her glance. "No, no hint," she said, smiling. As she moved, he heard the silken swish of her clothes. "I should rather give you a hint of how well pleased I am." "Then why don't you?" she asked. She leaned back against the chimney-piece and looped about her fingers a long necklace of glittering green beads. Where did these come from, she wondered. She could not remember ever having seen them before. But she could not pursue her bewilderment, for the necklace felt similar to her hands, much more familiar than the rest of the room. "When shall I?" he was insisting. "This evening, perhaps, when Hilary is in bed." Then who is he if Hilary is to be in bed, she wondered. She glanced at him and smiled again. "You are extraordinarily alike," she said, "you and Hilary. But Hilary is a little boy," she reminded herself. "It is silly to confuse the two." "We must discuss Hilary's progress," he said, his voice so burdened with meaning that she began to laugh at him. "Indeed we must," she agreed. "Your necklace is the colour of your eyes." He took it from her finger and leaned forward as if to kiss her. Hearing footsteps in the passage, she moved sharply aside, the necklace broke, and the beads were scattered over the floor. "Why is Hilary in the garden at this hour?" Mrs. Wilson asked. Her husband and the governess were on their knees, gathering up the beads. "Miss Chasty's necklace broke," her husband said. She had heard that submissive tone before. His voice lacked authority only when he was caught out in some infidelity. "I was asking about Hilary. I have just seen him running in the shrubbery without a coat." "He was sent to his room for being impertinent to Miss Chasty." "Please fetch him at once," Mrs. Wilson told Florence. Her voice always gained in authority what her husband's lacked. Florence hurried from the room, still holding a handful of beads. She felt badly shaken, as if she had been brought to the edge of some experience which had then retreated beyond her grasp. "He was told to stay in his room," Mr. Wilson said feebly. "Why did her beads break?" "She was fidgeting with them. I think she was nervous. I was making it rather apparent to her that I regarded Hilary's insubordination as proof of too much leniency on her part." "I didn't know that she had such a necklace. It is the showiest trash that I have ever seen." "We cannot blame her for the cheapness of her trinkets. It is rather pathetic." "There is nothing pathetic about her. We will continue this in the morning room, and they can continue their lessons, which are, after all, her reason for being here." "Oh, they are gone," said Hilary. His cheeks were pink from the cold outside. "Why did you not stay in your bedroom as you were told?" "I had nothing to do. I thought of my apology before I got there. It was, 'I am sorry, dear girl, that I spoke too near the point.' You could have spent longer and thought of a real apology. Look how long Papa spent, and he did not even think of a punishment, which is a much easier thing. Several times during the evening, Mr. Wilson, 'But you cannot dismiss the girl because her beads break.' 'There have been other things, and will be more,' his wife replied. So that there should not be more that evening, he did not move from the drawing-room, where he sat watching her doing her wool work. For the same reason, Florence left the schoolroom early. She went out and walked rather nervously in the park, feeling remorseful, astonished and upset. "Did you mend your necklace?" Hilary asked her in the morning. "I lost the beads. But my poor girl, they must be somewhere." She thought, "There is no reason to suppose that I shall get back what I never had in the first place." "Have you got a headache?" "Yes, go on with your work, Hilary." "Is it from losing the beads?" "No." "Have you a great deal of jewellery I have not seen yet?" She did not answer, and he went on. "You still have your brooch with your grandmother's plaited hair in it. Was it cut off her head when she was dead?" "Your work, Hilary. I shudder to think of chopping it off a corpse. You could have some of my hair now while I'm living." He fingered it with admiration, regarded a sum aloofly, and jotted down its answer. "Could I cut some of yours?" he asked, bringing his book to be corrected. He whistled softly, close to her, and the tendrils of hair around her ears were gently blown about. "It is ungentlemanly to whistle," she said. "My sums are always right. It shows how I can chatter and subtract at the same time. Any governess would be annoyed by that. I suppose your brothers never whistle?" "Never." "Are they to be clergymen like your father?" "It is what we hope for one of them. I am to be a famous judge. When you read about me, will you say, 'And to think I might have been his wife if I had not been so self-willed'?" "No, but I hope that I shall feel proud that once I taught you." "You sound doubtful." He took his book back to the table. "We are having a quiet morning," he remarked. "No one has visited us. Poor Miss Chasty, it is a pity about the necklace," he murmured, as he took up his pencil again. Evenings were dangerous to her. "He said he would come," she told herself, "and I allowed him to say so. On what compulsion did I?" Fearfully she spent her lonely hours out in the dark garden, or in her cold and candle-lit bedroom. He was under his wife's vigilance, and Florence did not know that he dared not leave the drawing-room. But the vigilance relaxed as it does. His carelessness returned, and steady rain and bitter cold drove Florence to warm her chilblains at the schoolroom fire. Her relationship with Mrs. Wilson had changed. A wary hostility took the place of meekness, and when Mrs. Wilson came to the schoolroom at tea times, Florence stood up defiantly and cast a look round the room as if to say, "Find what you can. There is nothing here." Mrs. Wilson's suspicious ways increased her rebelliousness. "I have done nothing wrong," she told herself, but in her bedroom at night, "I have done nothing wrong," she would think. "They have quite deserted us," Hilary said from time to time. "They have realized you are worth your weight in gold, dear girl. Or perhaps I made it clear to my father that in this room he is an interloper." "Hilary, you want to put yourself in the right in case that door opens suddenly, as it has been doing lately. There, you see. Good evening, Mamma. I was just saying that I have scarcely seen you all day." He drew forward her chair and held the cushion behind her until she leaned back. "I have been resting." "Are you ill, Mamma?" "I have a headache." "I will stroke it for you, dear lady." He stood behind her chair and began to smooth her forehead. "Or shall I read to you?" he asked, soon tiring of his task. "Or play the musical box?" "No, nothing more, thank you." Mrs. Wilson looked about her, at the teacups, then at Florence. Sometimes it seemed to her that her husband was right, and that she was growing fanciful. The innocent appearance of the room lulled her, and she closed her eyes for a while, rocking gently in her chair. "I dozed off," she said when she awoke. The table was cleared, and Florence and Hilary sat playing chess, whispering so that they wouldn't disturb her. "It made a domestic scene for us," said Hilary. "Often Miss Chasty and I feel that we are left too much in solitary bliss." The two women smiled, and Mrs. Wilson shook her head. "You have too old a head on your shoulders," she said. "What will they say of you when you go to school?" "What shall I say of them?" he asked bravely. But he lowered his eyes and kept them lowered. When his mother had gone, he asked Florence, "Did you go to school?" "Yes." "Were you unhappy there?" "No, I was homesick at first." "If I don't like it, there will be no point in my staying," he said hurriedly. "I can learn anywhere, and I don't particularly want the corners knocked off, as my father once spoke of it. I shouldn't like to play cricket and all those childish games, only to do boxing and draw blood," he added with sudden bravado. He laughed excitedly and clenched his fists. "You would never be good at boxing if you lost your temper. I suppose your brothers told you that. They don't sound very manly to me. They would be afraid of a good fight and the sight of blood, I dare say." "Yes, I dare say. It is bedtime." He was whipped up by the excitement he had created from his fears. "Chess is a woman's game," he said, and upset the board. He took the cushion from the rocking chair and kicked it inexpertly across the room. "I should have thought the door would have opened then," he said. "But as my father doesn't appear to send me to my room, I will go there of my own accord. It wouldn't have been a punishment at bedtime in any case. When I am a judge, I shall be better at punishments than he is." When he had gone, Florence picked up the cushion and the chessboard. "I am not good at punishments either," she thought. She tidied the room, made up the fire, then sat down in the rocking chair, thinking of all the lonely schoolroom evenings of her future. She bent her head over her needlework. The beaded sachet for the mother's birthday present. When she looked up, she thought the lamp was smoking, and she went to the table and turned down the wick. Then she noticed that the smoke was wreathing upwards from near the fireplace, forming rings which drifted towards the ceiling and were lost in a haze. She could hear a woman's voice humming softly, and the floorboards creaked as if someone were treading up and down the room impatiently. She felt in herself a sense of burning impatience and anticipation, and watching the door opening found herself thinking, "If it is not he, I cannot bear it." He closed the door quietly. "She had gone to bed," he said in a lowered voice. "For days I dared not come. She has watched me at every moment. At last, this evening, she gave way to a headache. Were you expecting me?" "Yes." "And once I called you Miss Mouse. And you are still Miss Mouse when I see you about the garden or at luncheon. In this room I can be myself. It belongs to us." "And not to Hilary as well, ever?" he asked her in amusement. She gave him a quick and puzzled glance. "Let no one intrude," he said hastily. "It is our room, just as you say." She had turned the lamp too low, and it began to splutter. "Firelight is good enough for us," he said, putting the light out altogether. When he kissed her, she felt an enormous sense of disappointment, almost as if he were the wrong person embracing her in the dark. His arch masterfulness merely bored her. A long wait for so little, she thought. He, however, found her entirely seductive. She responded with a sensuous languor, unruffled and at ease like the most perfect hostess. "Where did you practice this, Miss Mouse?" he asked. But he did not wait for the reply, fancying that he heard a step on the landing. When his wife opened the door, he was trying desperately to light a taper at the fire. His hand was trembling, and when at last, in the terribly silent room, the flame crept up the spill, it simply served to show Florence's disarray, which, like a sleepwalker, she had not noticed or put right. She did not see Hilary again, except as a blurred little figure at the schoolroom window, blurred because of her tear-swollen eyes. She was driven away in the carriage, although Mr. Wilson had suggested the station fly. "Let us keep her disgrace and her tearfulness to ourselves," he begged, although he was exhausted by the repetitious burden of his wife's grief. "Her disgrace. My mistake, I have said, was in not taking your accusations about her seriously. I see now that I was in some way bewitched. Yes, bewitched is what it was, acting against my judgment, nay, my very nature. I am astonished that anyone so seemingly meek could have cast such a spell upon me." Poor Florence turned head aside as Williams, the coachman, came to fetch her little trunk and the basket-work hold-all. Then she put on her cloak and prepared herself to go downstairs, fearful lest she should meet anyone on the way. Yet her thoughts were even more on her journey's end. For what, she wondered, could she tell her father, and how to expect him to understand what she could not understand herself? Her head was bent as she crossed the landing, and she hurried past the schoolroom door. At the turn of the staircase, she pressed back against the wall to allow someone to pass. She heard laughter, and then up the stairs came a young woman and a little girl. The child was clinging to the woman's arm and coaxing her, as sometimes Hilary had tried to coax Florence. "After lessons," the woman said firmly but gaily. She looked ahead, smiling to herself. Her clothes were unlike anything that Florence had ever seen. Later, when she tried to describe them to her mother, she could only remember the shortness of a tunic which scarcely covered the knees, a hat like a helmet drawn over eyes intensely green and matching the long necklace of glass beads which swung on her flat bosom. As she came up the stairs and drew near to Florence, she was humming softly against the child's pleading. Silk rustled against her silken legs, and all of the staircase, as Florence quickly descended, was full of fragrance. In the darkness of the hall, a man was watching the two go round the bend of the stairs. The woman must have looked back, for Florence saw him lift his hand in a secretive gesture of understanding. It is Hilary, not his father, she thought. But the figure turned before she could be sure and went into the library. Outside on the drive, Williams was waiting with her luggage stowed away in the carriage. When she had settled herself, she looked up at the schoolroom window and saw Hilary standing there rather forlornly, and she could almost imagine him saying, "My poor dear girl, so you were not good enough for me after all." "When does the new governess arrive?" she asked Williams in a casual voice, which hoped to conceal both pride and grief. "There is nothing fixed as far as I have heard," he said. They drove out into the lane. "When will it be her time?" Florence wondered. "I am glad that I saw her before I left." "We are sorry to see you going, miss." He had heard that the maids were sorry, for she had given them no trouble. "Thank you, Williams." As they went on towards the station, she leaned back and looked at the familiar places where she had walked with Hilary. "I know what I shall tell my father now," she thought, and she felt peaceful and meek, as though beginning to be convalescent after a long illness. The end.